Okay, hi everyone. It's Brynley Little here from your land partner, and I'm joined by father and co-founder of your land partner, Richard, today. And we want to cover off a subject in and around what your main role is, what your main job is as a developer. So that is the topic for today's content discussion. And I'm going to start things off really for clarification. Obviously, we've been involved in the land planning development business for a long time, and our main area of development covers a lot of different areas. You know, the terminology in and around development is the first thing to kind of clear up really, because you get people calling themselves developers that might do refurbs and sell on houses, one-offs, things like that. You've got people doing conversions. You've got people doing self-builds. You've got contractors that would often interchange their name with developer and contractor. But where we sit really in and around that topic is that a developer, as we would term it, is somebody who is creating new units, whether that be through conversion or new build. And new build is our area of expertise. But the good thing is that within the development industry, within the development life cycle and process, the steps of the process, whether it be conversion or new build or 1 unit or 100 units, is relatively the same. So it's about understanding the fundamentals and then working your way through the steps in the process on each project that you are looking at and working on. Now, as a developer, you have to wear many different hats, but your main role and the subject of what we want to talk about and go into more detail on is what is the main job? What is your main job as a developer? And essentially, your main job as a developer is looking for, identifying, managing, and mitigating risk. Because development is a risky business, right? You know, you can make a lot of money. And generally in industries where you can make a lot of money, you have a lot at stake as well. You know, it's obviously a bit different to the kind of other property strategies that you might be involved in. You know, that the level of financial input is a lot different. The timescales are a lot different. The technical nous and the people that you need to have around you is often a lot different as well. So you are managing lots of different pieces of the puzzle. But risk is ever present all the way through throughout the process, whether that be, you know, time in terms of, you know, the amount of investment in terms of time that you're putting into it and effectively risking, because you're not going to get that back. So are you spending time in the right areas all the way through to the financial element and all the way through to the technical side and of things in terms of building? Now, we would divide risk really into 3 key areas. And by dividing it into 3 key areas, it allows you to look at them much more specifically and have your finger on the pulse in terms of where the risk is at what given point of the process. So first of all, you've got market risk. Second of all, you've got financial risk. And then thirdly, you've got technical risk. So we're just going to spend a bit of time, myself and Richard, going through our take on these 3 areas. That's market risk, financial risk, and technical risk. And I'm just going to start things off with market risk. And obviously, the thing with market risk is the market itself is always in a state of flux. It's always moving up or down. It's never really static for massive amounts of time. There's always regional differences, there's national differences, there's things that can affect the market for a short term, there's things that can affect the market for a long term, recessions, you know, rises. So it's almost like a wave really. It's constant. You've got to keep your eye on what's happening within the market, because that's going to affect what types of deals that you do. So an example of market risk might be you've identified a site, it's got no planning permission. You go down the route, you get planning permission, that's all great. You know, you've navigated the risks of getting planning permission, which we might come on to in the other areas of risk. You've navigated all that, you've put all in the finances, you've got your piece of paper that gives you your approval and your consent. But what you've got actual consent for is a scheme that the market either isn't ready for, potentially. An example of that could be co-living. That's quite a big a kind of a rising market type, if you like, or housing type is co-living. Well, not all areas will be able to handle that kind of business model, but it also could be where you've got planning permission for something that the market is already saturated with. For example, apartments. Lots of areas across the country have got a lot of apartments, many of them empty, but apartments seem to be, certainly if you're dealing with sites that are in a town, in a city, seem to be the go-to when it comes to planning permission. So it's one good thing, doing the deal, getting the planning permission, working out that you're going to make X amount of thousands of pounds, hundreds of thousands of pounds, 400,000-500,000, whatever it may be. But that's just a paper profit. And unless you can build them and sell them or rent them in the market as it is, or what it's going to be in 12 months or 18 months time, then you are taking on market risk. So you've got to assess market conditions and then go forward with schemes that you think are going to be appropriate for the market at the right time.
Yeah, absolutely, Bryn. Yeah. So let's move on to financial risk. So examples of financial risk, potentially paying too much for a site. Unfortunately, that is probably the most common thing that comes across our desk when we're looking at various projects. So paying too much for the site is often fed by people asking. Their expectation is too much for a site, and that comes then down to motivation, if you like. So what causes that financial risk is probably the overarching risk amongst all of the different types of risk, which is the people risk. The you, the me, the other people you're working with, where are you getting your advice from, etc. All of these are part of your financial risk, and indeed the market risk and the technical risk as well. So overarching is the people risk. So motivation is a great thing. So we see people overpay because they're motivated to do a deal because they think it's a great deal. They might be naive. They don't understand the numbers. They haven't appraised it correctly, or their people haven't appraised it correctly. So unless you have sound numbers, you can't really assess the risk. But the financial risk is about a lot more than just the numbers, as Bryn sort of said. The market conditions, etc., etc. But essentially, financial risk is key. We are risk managers, as Bryn said, and you've got to manage the financial risk. You're going to be bringing in development funding. You're possibly going to be bringing in investors. Are you handling their money? How risky is it? Are you a safe pair of hands? So not understanding, firstly, what you're getting into, naivety, ignorance, call it whatever you will, is where the problems start. Surrounding yourself with people who equally don't really understand it, but you may feel they do because they know a little bit more than you. That also introduces risk. So there's risk all the way through. And so another aspect of financial risk is who you're borrowing from, who your investors might be. Are you aligned? Are you good at communicating with each other? Do you understand the expectations of their expectation of you in terms of a role, their expectation your expectation of them in terms of understanding what they want, how much do they want to keep being kept informed of what's going on. Communication, as we all know, is very, very, very important. So it's if you don't have an agreed and acceptable to all parties method, a process of communication, you'll soon get into problems, even in the good times. So there's financial risk in terms of your equity providers. And if you're getting funding, it might be MES funding, it might be development funding, it might be development funders that are coming in with the whole capital stack, as it were. Who are they? Who's providing their money? Who is it when things might not go too well, with the development or the economy or whatever it might be? Who's actually going to be in control? Who do you understand what their stepping rights are? Effectively, when can they take control of the project? and this happens a lot more obviously in recessions and times, pandemic times and that sort of thing. So financial risk is massive, and understanding it. And unfortunately, we see too many people get involved in projects that they don't understand the risk. Yeah, sure. When we look at stuff, we'll say no to pretty much everything, really, almost everything. We see people say, oh, they've looked at 10 projects and they've got 2, they've made 2 offers and they're going forward. So we would say that's impossible. Our sort of success rate would be, 1, 2, 3 in 100, and that's 100 well filtered and well considered projects. So if you expect to go on Rightmove, for instance, commercial, and get a deal and sort of say, oh, I've offered on 10 or 20 and I'm going to get a deal coming out the other end, it is extremely unlikely that you are fully aware of the risks of that project.
Yeah, that's a really good point. That's certainly the people element. Obviously, we will probably cover in another session. Other roles of being a developer and becoming a developer, but understanding the people offer the most risk almost, because they're in so many ways. You can only really control yourself. You can't control other people's actions or anything like that. So it's important to understand the relationships and the alignment of everybody involved from day one to kind of minimize that risk. Essentially, there is high reward in this business, and as I said before, where there's high reward, there is often high risk. So what we would say is, if you look after the risks, the rewards will look after themselves. And where we see people make a lot of wrong turns, possibly, is too much focus on the reward. Too much focus on they've done the appraisal, they've done the numbers, they're going to make $250,000, they're going to make £1 million, whatever it may be. And because that is so alluring and so exciting and enticing, you've often already spent the money. You see £300,000 down on paper, you think, well, I'm going to reinvest this much into my business, and this much is going to be allocated to this personal thing that you want to do, and this will pay down some of my mortgage, or this will go towards a family holiday, whatever it may be. The difficulty by going down that rabbit hole is that you become blinkered and you miss a lot of things. We often within our own business have review sessions at regular points, and most of the time when we're reviewing things, it isn't talking about the positives of the project. The positives of the project just emanate throughout. We all, you're talking about all the positives kind of just as and when you go through. But when you have debates and discussions within your own team and the contractors and all the important people that are part of the process, it's about, okay, what are the risks and how do we get around them? Because if you can work on that basis, it's not about completely getting rid of risk, because that's impossible. You can't get rid of the risk associated, but can you put things in place that are going to mitigate as much of that risk as possible? And some of that, the third area of risk of what we're talking about is technical risk. Now we're dealing with quite a technical kind of subject, really, when you think about all the different elements are together, the technicalities of how to find sites and how to invest your time and money and resources in the right software, and how to engage the right consultants to put together the right planning applications for you, and how to appraise sites and look at the different kind of technicalities within looking at that in terms of forecasting market conditions and all these kind of different elements, construction, the amount of time it takes, the amount of people involved, the amount of money involved. There's lots of technical elements to the entire process. So examples of technical risk would be spending far too much resource on pursuit of planning permission without a strategy in place. It's like, setting off without, that finish line. What does it look like? So planning is one of the areas of the entire process where you can add the most value. but it's also kind of a risky business if you don't know what you're doing. So it's about appointing the right people and having the right plan in place from day one. You do not want to go into the process with your fingers crossed, hoping that the planners, the council are going to say yes to your application. You want to know what they're going to say to as much as you can, and know what plan A, plan B, plan C is. If it goes to appeal, for example, hopefully you've planned that it's going to go to appeal and you've got the right documentation in place. So that's one of the ways of mitigating that risk, is having the right documentation, auditing the process, recording everything, making sure you've got the right paper trails. You don't want to leave things to chance, effectively. And to negate technical risk is having a proper plan in place. You know, technical risk within the construction process, obviously a lot can kind of go wrong within the construction process in terms of you might not get materials at the right time, you might have cost overruns, you might have time overruns, which is to be expected to a degree in this process. So have you planned for it? Are you expecting that you've got a bridging loan, for example, or you've got developer finance coming in and you've allowed for 12 months of interest, and you've allowed 3 months to get the planning permission, you've allowed the 9 months to get the build done, and then you've not allowed any time to get the units sold because you think you're going to sell them all off plan? So have you allowed enough time, or are you taking on too much risk? Or is it best to, review it and go, actually, before you start, it's more realistic that it's going to take 15 months or 18 months, and then plan for that from the start, because you don't want to have a profit margin of X, and then by the end of the project, because of these overruns that you haven't accounted for, that profit is halved or could even be wiped out in certain times.
Yeah. Well, what I would say is whether we confuse people by talking about technical risk, if you look at it from another sort of description, it's probably process risk. It's much the same. We call it technical, and people might understand it better at process. And Bryn's right. You have to strategize all the way through, and we'll be talking about this in a lot more detail on other occasions. But I guess. Strategy is something that people think is probably just, it's a quick thing, you have a chat about it, that's our strategy. Well, that isn't the strategy. That might be what you're actually talking about, is where you want to go. The strategy is how we're going to get there. And so we will look at most opportunities that come on our desk. We will look at all the major aspects of the development process before we actually start talking about deals and offers and things like that, because until you've assessed all of that, until you've assessed the risk, which is what we're talking about, assess the risk first, and then can you put those mitigation things in place? Can you actually structure the deal so that you're not taking all the risk on the end value, for instance, particularly at times when values are unknown? Obviously, that's more important. What I want to finish up on anyway is risk, and I see probably more examples of a poorly taken risk, or poorly managed risk, or poorly assessed risk than most people, because we get a lot of project rescue, people a bit stuck, don't know what to do on our desk than most people. And it does come back down to people not perhaps understanding the risk, and our series of videos, etc., is there to help you understand the risk. But you still need to reach out and actually perhaps, assess it a little bit further before you start actually exchanging and completing on projects. So we have projects on the desk all the time, even in the good times. Yeah. I'll make a statement. The majority of developers don't make money in the good times. That might sound silly to some people, but I can pretty much back that up. And so lots of people call themselves developers, and they're not probably developers. They want to be developers, but they don't know enough about the development business. They are taking on the risk of a new business sector, and and whatever sector they're coming from, they may be very, very well versed in that. But it would be a little bit like Bryn and I starting to open a chain of restaurants, for instance. We eat food. We know what it's like. We know what we like, etc., and we know how much we're prepared to pay. But we wouldn't have a clue. The risks are in the margins. The profits and the rewards as well are also in the margins. You've got to assess the risks. You might look at a project and 80% of it looks fantastic, but it's the 20% that you haven't looked at or you don't fully understand where that's where it turns around. I think the expression bites you in the bum, isn't it, Bryn?
Yeah, it certainly can do. I think the way to almost look at it is that, it's the old phrase would be, if somebody told you to jump off a cliff, would you, essentially? Does it depend who is telling you to jump off of that cliff? If that person knows and has assessed the risks and rewards of that, then would you be prepared to do what they're saying? So basically, it's about getting the right people around you, getting the right information, getting the right team around you that have been through multiple projects in multiple different times of the market and the economic up and downs that you may face, because the advice that you're going to get is going to be much more well-rounded and appropriate for what you're looking to do, and essentially, if you're that's applicable even if you're starting or scaling, regardless whether you've done a few developments or whether you've done none or whether you've done lots of developments. There's always somebody that will be able to give you a different perspective and a different outlook on certain situations. So one of the biggest pieces of advice I could give to anybody really is to align yourself with somebody that has trodden the path before. They've jumped off that cliff. They know what's at the bottom. They know what it's going to be like on the way down, and they're there to tell you whether you should jump or not, effectively. So that's just about it for this first installment piece of content for you guys, and obviously there's going to be lots more to come. Whether you're watching live, watching on whatever platform you're watching this on, we're going to be continuing to deliver content across the whole property development life cycle, and enable you to build a business that is sustainable, successful, and can have a positive impact to many, many people. So thanks very much for joining, and stay tuned for another topic and another discussion sometime very soon. Bye. Thanks very much.